Now, for those of you who don't know who Mediahawk are, Mediahawk is a call tracking and marketing analytics solution designed to be an easy to use, accurate and reliable, so you can quickly and confidently find out what's working and what isn't working within your organization. Mike co-founded the business in 2002 with Harry Bott, as when working in the media and publishing sector, they recognized that advertisers and marketers needed a better way to prove the performance of their marketing. Mike's a specialist in marketing, analytics and attribution, with over 20 years experience advising businesses on how to measure and improve their marketing performance to increase revenue. Previously, he's worked on pioneering internet projects during the infancy of the web for media organizations, and he was head of programs at EMAP, which is one of the largest media companies in the UK, working from the likes of Elle, Red, Heat, Kiss FM and Motorcycle News. In his spare time, while away from monitoring trends within the media, Mike enjoys walking up mountains and hills, failing to play the guitar apparently, and watching England rugby, and as I said to him earlier today, unfortunately watching Arsenal Football Club. So Mike, over to you, who will now be presenting on the marketing trends and driving inquiries and the move-ins within the social care sector. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Louis. That's very kind of you. That was a very interesting and pleasant intro. I didn't know that you would actually tell anybody or let anybody know that I was an Arsenal supporter. Perhaps I ought to remove that. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me today for our Autumn Care Home Trends webinar. As Louis said, I'm Mike Morell, and I'm CEO and co-founder of Mediahawk, and plenty of experience over the last 20 years, not just with Mediahawk, but working to understand demand analytics in digital media and working in software. Today, we're going to be looking at recent marketing trends, which are going to give you, I think, some really interesting insights into what's happening in the market at the moment. And as Louis said, we'll be getting a copy of this webinar to you after this meeting. So without further ado, I'll just take you through the agenda. I'm going to briefly introduce to you Mediahawk and call tracking. And then there's 4 key trends I want to talk to you about today. And I'll be putting them on 4 key slides. First is a general trend to show you what's happening in terms of market buoyancy at the moment. Then secondly, we're going to focus on your websites, what's happening in terms of visitors and calls from those visitors to your websites. Thirdly, we'll be drilling then down into digital sources, which is generating those visitors and subsequent calls. And then lastly, interestingly, I think how effective those sources are actually performing at making inquiries for your businesses at the moment. And then along the way, I'm going to give you some insights and some learnings from our experience in this area at the moment. And lastly, we're going to look at, we're going to have some time right at the end for a little bit of Q&A together. Okay, so let me introduce Mediahawk to you. Mediahawk, as Louis said, has been attributing calls for our clients since 2002. When we pioneered call tracking in the UK. And here's some information on just some of the customers we work with in this sector, which we work very closely with our customers. We try to understand what their objectives and their needs are. And that very much helps us to make sure we attribute as tightly and as closely for them as we possibly can. We attribute well in excess of 50 million calls a year and many, many more visitors. We attribute our clients' spend, we understand their activities that produce inquiries, and then most importantly, we understand their move-ins and the care services that their customers take. And that helps them attribute their spend, organise their marketing budgets more efficiently. So, simply, who's had experience of call tracking before? I know I've got some customers here, so I know that some of you will have done in the past. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a very brief overview of call tracking, especially in the care sector. And we all know that over the last few years, visitor journeys have got much more complicated than they ever were, and perhaps especially so in the last 2 or 3 years. And if we think of journeys to do with your visitors, you'll be using advertising channels such as paid search, review sites, social media, door drops, billboards, sponsorship, print, the list just goes on and on. And if you look at this simple infographic, you can see here that there's a list of marketing channels on a website, and you can see that people can call you from your Google business profile, for example. They might come and call you from your social media site. They might come and call you from a Google Ads advertisement. Of course, they might not call you. They might just click on a GBP listing or from a Google Ads or come into you from a social media post, and then they'll call you. So you can just see how complicated it is. And that's ignoring everything to do with offline and all of the other digital sites as well that we've just spoken about, such as review sites, etc. Essentially, what we're looking at is quite a complicated business journey. And what Mediahawk does is it brings that down to a much simpler, position where you can understand what's happening, hopefully, in your marketing, and you can start to make some better decisions based on what's performing for you and what's not. So we identify which digital and offline marketing sources produce inquiries, what works and what doesn't, and which activities finally help to move to create move-ins for you. And it's interesting when you think of it, because if you think of a digital to a digital piece of attribution, so somebody clicks on a digital ad and then fills in a form on your website, that's super simple to attribute, isn't it? Because it goes straight from one digital ad to another digital form, you've got 100% attribution. But that's not most of the time how people respond in the care sector. There's three types of businesses that receive calls. There are businesses that are either providing a service that's very complex, it's very personal, it's very expensive. And if you think of that scenario in the care sector, it ticks all three boxes. It's a very complex service, it's a very personal service, and it can be a very, very expensive service. So the telephone is enormously important to people in your position. And marketing analytics, and especially call tracking, provides evidence, allows you to test marketing and justify budget to understand what improves occupancy. So in a nutshell, that's who Mediahawk are, and that's what call tracking is. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start to introduce you to our emerging trends report. So this is our autumn report. And what it does is it tells you three things, really: what the buoyancy of the marketplace is at the moment, which channels and sources are performing well, and how well they are not just producing inquiries, but how good they are at producing move-ins for you. All of this information that comes from our call tracking platform, we're able to produce a biannual trends report, which is really useful, especially for our clients. But for our clients, we're able to go one step further. So our clients are able to be benchmarked against the marketing trends that they're seeing at the moment. And that's really important because it answers the question. What we try to do is answer that question, that is it me or is it the market? Are we performing particularly well at the moment, or is the whole market performing particularly well? And we all ask ourselves that question in our businesses, and it just allows us to see where we benchmark and sit against the rest of the market. So first, I'm going to introduce you to the first report on our care home trends report, and I hope you can all see this okay. So what we're looking at here is a timeline from October last year, October 2022, all the way through to September 2023. And what we're seeing is a line representing total calls into our care sample here. And it's indexed as a baseline here at 0 in October. So the first thing that we can see straight away is that there was an enormously strong growth from October all the way through to March. In fact, what we were looking at was almost a 22% increase in inquiry volume in that period. It's a very, very buoyant inquiry market. And there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of it was that there was some demand clearing being done. So there'd been some pent-up demand in the system, confidence was returning to the market, and a lot of that needed to be fulfilled, and a lot of that was done. But then what we saw was almost immediately, which happened in April 2023 here, was quite a severe reduction in that demand from a peak here in March. Now, it didn't go back all the way to where it was in October, but it did go back quite a long way, and you can see here from this note that I've made here that it's plateaued. Then it's gone up and down a little bit, but it's plateaued since that April reduction. That said, still year on year, it's almost 6% higher than it was back in October. It's been a lot more stable and a lot more of a normal market. And I think then looking forward, that begs the question: okay, so what's happening into October, November, December, and then into January? But I think what we would now expect to see at this point of view, and what we're starting to see through October, what we have seen through October and November, is this current trend continuing. And now we're expecting to see an increase in December, a small increase in December, with then a big uptick as we hit through into the new year. So I'm interested to know whether this is similar to the profile that you've been seeing. The fact that we're still up 6% a year later is really good news, especially after that drop-off that happened between March and April. So if that's what's happening to total call volumes, what I'm now going to look at is what's happening to your website in particular. So I'm going to drill into first into visitors and then into calls and to your actual websites, and it produces quite interesting information. So it's a little bit more complex what we're looking at here. So I'll just explain it to you quickly. The orange bar that we're looking at is calls into your website, or calls generated because of your website only. And once again, it's baselined here in October 22 at 0%. The blue bar are visitors arriving at your website. And then the lines then is able to show an efficiency or effectiveness level. So how effective are visitor sources at generating telephone calls? Because we all know that if we generate visitors to our websites, that's one thing to have them from a source. But actually, we'd much rather perhaps from that source have a lower level of visitor, but a higher level of calls from that source. And that's really important because it means that the visitor source is not just good at generating visitors, but it can generate telephone calls and inquiries for us. So it gives us a level of efficiency. Now, this is really interesting, especially when we compare it to the previous slide that showed total calls. So what we can see is, first of all, we've got this downturn that happened, as we would expect, in call volumes from the website in April. But look, if I go back to the previous slide, what you can see here is that downturn happened. Then we saw a little bit of a recovery, and it was still about 8% higher than October, but it pretty much plateaued. But that wasn't what we saw here in website calls. You can see we've got a call downturn, but there was a rebound here that happened here. And that's quite interesting. And what's causing that rebound, and what we can see in our figures, is that a paid search is driving this rebound at that point. So what happened in the market was that the downturn was very clearly recognized, and tactically a lot of money has been put into paid search. And that has very, very quickly increased the call volume. And you can see then at this point that rather than this now fall back, actually it's continued. So the number of calls that are being received from the website has stayed fairly similar. You can see it does drop down a little bit as we start to get into the autumn period, but it's still much, much higher than the previous graph was showing, which shows that it's working, a lot of the spend that's come through from paid search. Here's an interesting point, and this is a very interesting one. What we can see, though, is whilst those call volumes have stayed high, visitor levels have plateaued off, and they're not particularly down year on year. You can see them back to October here; they're about where they were, but the number of calls is far outstripping what's happening to the visitor levels, and that again shows how efficient that paid search spend has been. Very interesting point. And then just before I move on off this second graph of the four that I'm going to show you, I'm just going to show you one important learning that we've got here as well. And that what we're seeing is that time to move in is increasing. It's not across the board, but the majority of the time it is increasing. And it's consistently 50% longer from first inquiry to a move-in or a service being taken. Sometimes it's double the amount of time. And that's important because you'll be measuring, apart from all of the other KPIs that you're working with, you'll be measuring two clear metrics as one of those, as part of those. One will be the number of inquiries you'll be making, and secondly will be the revenue change based on those inquiries. And what we're expecting to see is a greater time to impact the second metric. So you're going to see inquiries, but the amount of time it takes for that to convert into revenue is going to be longer in the future. And I don't think there's anything sinister in that movement. I think it's some of it's to do with the state of the economy at the moment, but largely it's because a lot of the demand has been cleared at the moment. And I think we're moving back to not a long time from inquiry to move in, but a more natural time from inquiry to move in. Okay. So let's have a look. I was going to show you the third of the fourth graph. Let's have a look at what is generating web traffic at the moment. Now, what we're looking at here is a chart, a donut chart, showing us the number of visitors, the proportion of visitors by source to websites. And we've got, got the normal things we would expect to see in there, like a very large chunk of Google Organic, which I should point out also includes Google Business Profile, and a little bit more of that in the future in a moment, and also a large chunk here from Google Paid Search. So if we look at key winners and losers in this and what's changing in this visitor profile to websites, the first change is unsurprisingly from what I've just said, is quite an increase here in paid search visitors. And we're seeing that's increased by about 20%. So it's up about 6 or 7% from where it was. Very important uptick that we've started to see. Then what we've started to see is the losers in market share because of the increase of paid search have been Google Organic, and also we've seen a drop off on Facebook. So it's perhaps not unsurprising that when a lot of budget goes into paid search, that the Google Organic listings reduce and perhaps Facebook listings reduce as well. And it's very interesting to see how this resonates with you and whether this is something that's familiar with you and that you're seeing in your markets at the moment. And something else just to point out at this point, because this is visitors to the website, but you really must not forget at this point, as just do not forget offline advertising. The amount of clients that we have who produce well-targeted, well-timed, and well-produced offline advertising campaigns. Very, very regularly, these offline advertising campaigns will influence more than 10% of move-ins. They're a really important channel in this sector. Okay, so if that's the traffic generated by these sources, the last chart I'm going to show you is how that converts into call inquiries generated from the same group of sources. Now, this is the actual number of call inquiries that we're seeing across the market at the moment through the year. And this is really interesting because you can see it's a much simpler donut. There's not as many items on that. And that's because there's a lot of sources that, whilst they produce visitors, don't produce high level of inquiries. But there's a couple of points that I really want to bring to your attention. So the first is Bing. Now, Bing share has always been small, but a highly effective call generator for our customers. And that's for a whole number of reasons, such as the demographic of the user, the desktop prevalence of Bing, etc. It's very good at generating inquiries, but it's generated even more inquiries at the moment. So we might, see this being about 6 or 7% of calls. But as you can see here now, that Bing Organic plus Bing Paid Search is even higher. It's close to 10%. So it's even more important than it has been. Appreciate it's a small proportion, but it's a very, very important proportion. The next change we can see is the change in paid search. So that increase in spend has really started to drive more calls from paid search. And this is interesting. So the last time we did this trends report was in the spring, about 6 months ago, and this has increased 13% since the spring. But even more so, year on year, this is a 24% increase in paid search calls. So we can really see it translating through. And there's quite an important point to bring out here. It's working 100%, and it's been a response to a potential downturn. So it's an obvious, sensible response, and it's clearly working. But it is very expensive. So it's causing record bid rates, especially on location-based search terms. So, for example, if we're looking at things like care homes in Northampton or a care home near me, those sorts of search terms are much, much more expensive. And then, interestingly, lastly, which matches the drop-off in visitor volume, we can see a drop-off in calls from organic search at this point. Okay. So just before we move off this last graph of the trends report, which I wanted to show you, there's one other point we need to make at this point, and it's about occupancy. And this marketing drive has improved occupancy rates to pre-COVID, in some cases to COVID levels, to the same level we were at prior to COVID. Some of them are very close to being that same level. So what we're finding now is that making marginal now improvements to those is harder, it's more competitive, and because of that, it's much more expensive. So what we're expecting to see is the trend of spend increasing, particularly on digital search, to increase. And that's the last point that I wanted to make on those on that donut chart and where calls are coming from. It'd be interesting to see, again, as I've said to you, whether this is something you're seeing in your marketplace, and is this how you're seeing response levels at the moment. So to bring this together then, and to summarize for you, the key trends. So the first trend clearly is that demand is up year on year, up about 6% year on year. Although we saw very high increase in demand through to March, we then saw quite a drop off in April. But then what we've noticed and what's been really clear in the market is that since then, a marketing response which focused very heavily on paid advertising has driven inquiries back up. It's been very successful to the point where we're seeing a 24% increase year on year in paid search calls. And then thirdly, that because occupancy levels are back to either or close to being back to pre-COVID levels, making marginal improvements now to those to the moving rate is going to be harder, and this is currently pushing up marketing spend, and we're seeing that throughout, especially digital spend. And then the last point that we came to was that inquiry moving times we've noticed is increasing significantly year on year. So it's taking a little bit longer, sometimes up to 50% longer, 100% longer for an inquiry to convert to a move-in, which means there's going to be a revenue lag between marketing generated inquiries to that converting to revenue. Okay, so I've given you 4 good trends and really brought them together for you. Then we're getting close to the end of the session. As we said, as Louis and I both said, please help yourself to a copy of the trends report. We're going to have some questions in a minute. You can download it right here by clicking on this QR code, which will take you to a page where you can download it, or we'll email it to you after the presentation. And that brings us to the end of this part of the presentation. So I know that Louis is going to be fielding some questions that are going to come through the chat session. So thank you, Louis. And if you've got any questions that have come through, I'll be really interested to hear them.
Thank you, Michael. That was incredibly interesting. Thank you very much for that. That was really insightful. I had no idea how much data you could draw out from the likes of looking at phone calls and in terms of market trends. That was incredibly interesting from my perspective. So we haven't got anything in the chat yet. So if people would like to, if the attendees would like to pop any questions or raise their hands now to come off mute and to ask Michael a question about the report or about marketing trends in general, that would be really great to hear. I did get a couple of questions via email. One of them, which was looking at Google organic searches and paid for searches. Now, these are both important channels, but as an organization, how can I decide which one to invest in more than the other? Any thoughts on that would be brilliant to hear.
Yeah, sure. And they are 2 enormously important channels for our customers. They produce not just visitors, but a huge amount of inquiries. And what we've noticed on both of those channels is that we're able to attribute those channels directly back to move-ins. And both of those channels actually have an influence, even if they're not last click or first click, they have an enormous influence at some point in a visitor journey. And in fact, it's very unusual for them not to be involved in a visitor journey. So they are both really, really important channels. Now, at the moment, what you'll notice is that paid search, and what we've said is that it's clearly being used very tactically to bolster inquiry levels and to make sure that care operators capture as much of that inquiry share as they possibly can, and it's very successful in doing that. So I'd highly recommend that I would suspect that trend is going to continue. although it's going to get much more competitive as bid rates go even higher. So I'd say that that is 100% an important channel for you. Google Organic, there's one thing that's really important about Google Organic, which is encompassing the Google Business Profile listing. That's enormously important. I mean, unbelievably important. And it's still quite incredible that sometimes it's something that arrived at late and that we're not entirely on top of. So making sure that our Google Business Profile listings are really up to date and accurate is incredibly important. So I would say right now, they're both, unfortunately, I can't give you one definitive answer. They are both super, super important. Right now, paid search is 100% very, very important. But so is making sure that your organic listings are your Google Business Profiles kept up to date, but also you're achieving good or organic search positions by making sure that you're in the correct directories, etc., which is obviously clearly important. I hope that answers that one, Louis.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I mean, I guess it's quite dependent on the organization and what they're trying to achieve. I think that's a big area, but I think, yeah, it's always good to value up what's more suitable to an organization. So that's incredibly helpful. Thank you. I'm interested to hear from the attendees and the care providers on the call whether any of the trends which Michael was sharing are you seeing reflected within your organizations, whether that be in inquiries, particularly on the times of the years. I think that'd be really interesting to bring in that conversation within to the call. So while members are possibly thinking about that, another question that came through though was on Bing and about Bing's growth. Now, one member's asked, do you think that its growth is important, and will it continue to grow, or if it's just a short-term aspect of its current growth trajectory?
Yeah, and that's another really good question, and it's interesting because Bing, in terms of spend, is often, I mean, you're talking of the 1%, 2%, 3% spend that somebody might spend on Google paid search. And it's typically a lot lower, but it has always been a very good performer in this particular sector, much more so than our other sectors. It always performs highly for care home operators. So to me, it's something that I would expect to see continue. I necessarily wasn't seeing the uptick that we've seen in recent months, but I think it makes perfect sense because overall, demand has still been quite buoyant, and it has a demographic which particularly suits this market, and it's also still very prevalent on desktop searches and desktops configurations. So if I was organising my budget at the moment, I would definitely have Bing as a core part of it, and I would make sure that I was properly represented. It can often as well be, you can get a lot more bang from your buck because the bid rates aren't as high as they are on Google Ads. It's something we typically find. So it's a good way to make sure that you can maximise your share of inquiries at a price that's not quite as expensive as elsewhere.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you. I mean, just coming again with my digital hat on, a big conversation that's going on at the moment is AI. Has AI come across at all within marketing trends and how that could be used within an organization? I wondered if you had any thoughts on that, because particularly, I'm not too sure how Bing's growth correlates with the introduction of Microsoft's Copilot and the way they're using AI in Microsoft Edge. But I wondered if that's been of all relevance in the past few months.
Yeah, it really has been. And I think that at the moment, what we're finding, especially in this sector, is that care is seeing, I would say, the early adoption of AI, and people are starting to experiment with it, to try it out, to see how they can make best use of it. And seems to be really clear that people are starting to have some success in that area. So I definitely think that it will become an important part of how marketers, especially in the care sector, are looking to use AI. I also think that some of the modelling that's going on the paid platforms is starting to try to make better use of it. I think that probably most people have found results are mixed at the moment, but it's definitely something that is going to be very important for the future, and indeed something that Mediahawk are looking at. So when Mediahawk look at AI, we're looking at outcomes of telephone calls. So being able to use AI to understand exactly precisely what happened on that telephone call and attribute that back to to the marketing that's generated that call is really important, because it shows you how effective that advertising spend is. So, for example, being able to understand by understanding what was said on the call, whether a move-in was booked or whether an inquiry, a visit to a care home was booked, is really helpful for our marketers to see.
Yeah, I think it's certainly interesting to think about just what AI is going to be touching everything in the years to come. So thank you for that, Michael. I've got a question from Julian, who has asked, would inquiries through carehome.co.uk fall under Google Organic?
Okay, so that's a very good question. So in this piece of analysis that we're looking at here, the calls from carehome.co.uk would fall under directories, not under Google Organic. Now, what we're looking at here, don't forget, is calls from your website. So on that donut chart, those were calls that were coming in to a care home directly from the website. So at this point, they're not included because they're website calls that are produced from the directory. So if you called, for example, from the actual carehome.co.uk listing, you didn't hit the website, it wouldn't appear on that donut, because they come off website. They're not coming from your website. And that donut we were looking at was showing what calls were coming from your website in particular. Carehome.co.uk is a very well known, very well supported and valued directory, and definitely produces a lot of calls and a lot of visitors, and is very often used in visitor journeys.
Thank you, Michael. Would any other members like to come in and ask some questions to Michael on this? Abby's put in the chat, it will be under referral. I'm assuming is that what you were referring to, Michael? Was in the
yeah. So in this piece of analysis on this donut chart, it'll be under. Thanks, Abby, for that. In this point, it will be under directories. We organise that under directories, which is a very important one. Obviously, in Google Analytics, when you're looking under your Google Analytics listing, it may very well be under referral.
Thank you for clarifying. Would other members like to come off mute or put anything in the chat to ask Michael a question, as we still have plenty of time for a Q&A? Or Michael, if there's anything else you would like to draw out, whether it be in the report or marketing trends in general, or how care providers can be better equipped to look at marketing trends, whether that via Google, for example.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is that we're entering a different, clearly entering a different time at the moment, and I think it's a more normal time. I think it's a more usual time, because we've been through a lot over the last 4 or 5 years, and we've seen some really unusual trends that we just were not expecting to see. Downticks in demand, followed by upticks in demand, followed by an increase in spend, etc. And I think that what we're going to see now is a return to much more normal trends, with spend being under a lot of pressure to increase spend, to take that marginal increase and to make smaller improvements is going to be something that's going to be quite an interesting thing to do. So I think that what's quite interesting is that when we start to look at moving into next year, into January, I think starting to look at other performing years, such as pre-COVID years, such as 2018 and the early 2019 figures, it's going to be very interesting to see whether that's borne out by the response levels and the move-ins that we start to see in those clients. At the same time, I would also say that what's very interesting is that we've got a lot of new directories and new entrants in the market at the moment. So generally, the marketplace is getting much more competitive, and there's much more variety there for care home operators to choose to advertise in. And I think that's going to have an enormous impact over the next 12, 24 months.
I certainly agree. I think pre-COVID, I think one of the interesting things when looking at this is how, as a sector, digitally wise, we've moved so much more forward over the past few years due to COVID, and all these digital tools are becoming much more available. Providers are much more aware of them and much more interested in using them and everything. So I think it's certainly interesting to look at, as you say, pre-COVID comparisons from next year onwards. I will give a few more minutes for members if they want to come off mute, sorry, or put anything in the chat. It would be really interested to. Oh, Abby. you have two questions. One issue we are facing is the few leads that we are receiving through Google Ads will be the care workers. Even though we add a lot of negative, keywords, if we go for an exact match, then the volume of leads generated will be low. I don't know, Abby, if you want to maybe come off mute and explain that a little bit more. But I believe, Michael, this is about have advertising via Google Ads and receiving few leads, particularly regarding what sort of specific words need to be highlighted in order to promote advertisation.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Oh, Sean, hello, hi.
Hey, hello everyone. Yeah. This is Abhi here. Me and Sean, from the same company. So basically, my query is, for the Google AdWords, when we start putting the keywords, the majority of the leads which you are getting, it can be the K workers as well. Let's say if I optimize for a keyword, say K homes in specific area, even the K worker who is looking for a job, they also will search for the same key term. And once they click on it, they will go and when they will fill the form where it will go for a recruitment, but not for my lead purpose. It won't serve as a resident or etc. So what we do normally is we optimize it with a lot of negative keywords. Let's say looking for job, etc. We put those in the negative keywords, but still I can see that a lot of job referrals are coming through Google Ads. So any way of stopping this or reducing this?
So Abby, hi Abby, it's really nice to meet you. That's a really good question, and it's a really common problem. And so one of the problems that care operators get is that they get an abundance of calls from not just people who are interested in their care facilities and their services, but people who are interested in providing services to them, or from workers who would like to be employed by them. So we get caterers calling them, we get entertainers calling, we get grounds people and maintenance people calling. So there's a couple of things that we can do that I think would be a good way of doing it. Obviously, you're negatively marking keywords, which is clearly a good thing to do. There's something else we can do. There's two things. One really good way of dealing with this is to use speech recognition. So we can use these on our system so that it will listen to a transcription of the call. It will understand that call is about an employment opportunity, and then that allows us then to mark that as a call, and then the visitor then as a caller about an employment opportunity. And what you can then do is build audiences based on those people who are calling you about employment opportunities to make sure that in the future those audiences never receive your Google ads in that way again. And equally, we can also do that with IVRs. So we really like our customers to have very simple messages when people ring through that says, if you would like to inquire about some of our care services, press 1. For all other inquiries, press 2. And that immediately allows you to allocate that audience as people who are of interest to your company, but they're not interested in your care services, and to build audiences based on those groups too. And both of those two things we find reduces spend in audiences who perhaps are not as interested in your care services. I hope that helps you a little bit.
Hi, Michael. Michael, sorry for cutting you down. So the solution which you proposed is basically after clicking, right? That happens once user click on it and then come to the website. Then once they fill the form, then you can filter it. Mediahawk or whatever, they can able to filter it. But my solution, but I will be charged for the Google, right? Because it's pay per click. Is there any way can I do this before they click?
Well, it's almost impossible to do before anybody's clicked or anybody's come through. But I understand your pain and why you want to do it. But the thing is that you need to know that person before they've come through isn't a care inquiry. So it's quite difficult to do if it's the first call, because of course the forms we can attribute forms, but we focus on those telephone calls, so it can be quite difficult to do. And what we need to do is to make sure that those audiences are built up, so when they do come through, we can remove them next time.
Good, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Abby.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Abby. I've got another question from Julian. Have you looked at drive times and distance from customer addresses to the care homes in question?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and another really good one. So yeah, we often do look at distances from where calls are coming in to where they're going from, and actually it's something I think that would be quite an interesting thing to start seeing our trends report. I'd quite like to start to do some more formal analysis on it. And honestly, it throws up some really interesting information. So obviously, we all know that the person who's doing the care searching and making the inquiry is often not the person who would be actually, either moving into a care home or using that care service. So there's often a very, very wide distance between where the caller is and where they're going to. So yeah, it is really interesting. It's another interesting thing is that we find that outdoor work, so billboards and things like that, especially newly opening care homes, which are obviously very close to the care homes, are really successful in generating telephone calls for our clients.
Thank you.
I hope that helps you, Julian.
Thank you, Michael. I will give it 1 more minute or so for any final questions. Obviously, we still have 15 minutes left, so if any provider does want to come off mute to ask Michael a question or to pop in the chat, then please do. If not, I can look to close this session. But Michael, I don't know if you had any final words you'd like to say just before we seek to close.
No, I think we've gone through those things that we wanted to introduce to you. I'd just like to to thank everybody who's come on board and come onto the webinar today to talk to us. It's a really interesting time. And afterwards, I've been so delighted to talk to anybody who'd like to talk to me personally about experiences that we're seeing at the moment in the care sector. And it would be delighted to talk further to you if you'd like to.
Thank you very much. Well, I'd just like to say thank you, Michael, for your taking time to present. I think it was an incredibly interesting session, and thank you for answering all those questions. Just talk about next steps to everyone. We will be sharing this. Recording with everyone on the call, along with the presentation, and I'll make sure the report is included in that because there's some excellent findings in there. So please do take your time to read through it. I'll also pass on, Michael, if it's okay with you, your email to members on the call as well to make sure that you can reach out at any time. But thank you, everyone, and thank you for your time. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. And thank you again, Michael.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.